impact the three areas that I was just talking about, but a terrorist attack in 2001 had just as big of an impact on the economy here as the state legislature can. And the world oil price can have just as big of an impact. And Chinese monetary policy can have just as big of an impact. So you have to remember that you're working within a very dynamic worldwide market with the things that you're doing here. And you're also kind of restricted in other ways. If we think about what's happened in the last year, the federal government is currently working on a $750 billion bailout of financial industries and banks. The auto industry has asked for a $25 billion bailout. And earlier this year, there was a $180 billion stimulus package. And all of these things seem to be having some impact, but they're not magic potions that are solving the economics. You know, we're helping support some financial industries, but there is not free-flowing credit right now as there was 5 years ago. The stimulus package seemed to me to sort of be taking really strong medicine when you have strep throat. Until you get the penicillin, you're not going to get over it. So it helped prop up consumer spending and it helped keep things going for a few months, but you know, it didn't change the direction of the economy. Now, if you sum up those three numbers I gave you, it's about $1 trillion. Your general fund appropriations budget for an entire year is $7.5 billion. And most of that, you know, is not new money that's available each year. Your new money in a good year is about $400 million. You can't go into debt. So you're not really looking at doing things like the federal government and creating massive stimulus in the state. You know, you have very limited resources to work with. So I'm not trying to say that this isn't a very important thing, because I think it is. I think this committee is great, and I think it's very important to have everybody learning and thinking about and doing what the legislature can do. I just wanted to kind of put a starting point onto it. So I'll take any questions you have for me, and then I'll hand it over to Todd and Natalie.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Maurer, thank you for being with us this morning. The Governor's Office recently released economic projections, or a budget based on assumed revenues for the next year. I'm wondering what the most recent comparable projections from the legislative staff is, or when they will be released, and how they compare to the Governor's seemingly optimistic assumptions about increased revenues from general and sales and other taxes.
Well, our latest forecast is still the September 20th forecast. December 20th will be our next release forecast. It is on a Saturday, so we'll actually release it on the 19th. And the Governor's Office released, what you heard from them was kind of an interim forecast. And at that point, we are below them in the current year with our September forecast. And they came to within a couple $1 million for the budget year. So we're really close together. Now, of course, we are reevaluating, rerunning all of our models right now for doing the December forecast. So I can't tell you where the numbers are going to end up until we get everything run through the models and look at what's happened. But the thought would be that what's being incorporated is all of the new information since we did the September forecast. I'm sure, knowing you, that you have been following very closely all of the things that are going on at the federal level, and can do in your mind a comparison of what's been good news and what's been bad news. So sort of the expectations of where the models are going to go seems pretty obvious, but we at this point haven't got through them. We don't know where the numbers are. The other thing to keep in mind is the forecast, even in September, was for a slowing economy. So it's not like every piece of bad news you hear automatically lowers the forecast, because some of that was already in the projections, but clearly there was some unexpected news since September. I don't know if that, I know it's a very economics ambiguous answer, but that's what we do.
Representative Bowman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mike, you talked about your economic background, and there are a couple of other states in the Mountain West that have the perception of being friendlier to the traditional oil and gas business. And I don't know if that's actually completely true. I've not seen a lot of studies that sort of line up their regulations next to our regulations like a scientific study would do. But you talked a minute ago about the fact that so many times in economics and in the economy, perception is very important. to having consumer confidence return and having the economy return. And I certainly wish President-elect Obama well in his naming of his new team today in Washington, and I hope that they can help to restore confidence. Talk for a minute about, is there anything that this committee could do to work on that would be received from the business community and from the public in general as something that would increase confidence and would create the perception that we're moving back in the right direction?
Well, I don't know that I have any specific things for you to say, pass a bill doing this. You know, that's not really my job as a nonpartisan staffer, but you've touched on a lot of the areas, and regulation certainly is part of it. And you're right, the consumer confidence, whether it's founded or unfounded, is very important, because whether or not you spend your money out in the economy is 2/3 of what's happening in the economy. Specifically to oil and gas, there have been a lot of new regulations, proposed. I am not really an expert or up to speed on those and how they compare to neighboring states, but the way I kind of look at regulation is, especially in the oil and gas market, is there's a value, a market value of, and let's just use gas because everybody's been hearing a lot about gas going up to 140 a barrel, and now it's back down into the 50s, I believe. If I am a producer, I'm going to produce when I can sell it for more than I can get it out of the ground for, right? And so the rigs and the equipment and the labor costs a certain amount of money. And then additional regulation can add to my costs. So what you're really looking at is the marginal increase the regulation is causing enough to push me over where it's profitable for me to bring it out of the ground? And so it's certainly an important comparison between the states, but we have the oil and gas, so it's more an issue of what are we doing here and are we preventing people from operating here, I think, than whether we're competitive with one.
And I think perhaps that might be something we might ask, and at this point in time, we're probably asking individually as opposed to asking as a formal committee, which we will be formalized at the beginning of the session. But we could look at a comparative analysis, as we did with the Severance Tax Committee. We were actually able to compare overall taxation rates, and we came out with a conclusion. We were below our, in large part, the surrounding states in our rate of taxation, but it's a very important piece of information as we move forward. And we could look at our proposed regulations, which have not, rules that have not been adopted, and look at those rules as it relates to perhaps other states as we go into adopting those measures. So thank you for that. And Representative Rice.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Representative Balmer, I think you touched on a good point. One of the main purposes for this committee, you asked, what could we do or what should we not do? And I'm paraphrasing, of course, what you said, but I think that's essentially the point. And I'll reiterate, when we get to the latter part of the agenda here, where we talk about the committee discussion, I think that the chair touched on it, we will be engaging with many different groups and stakeholders throughout this process and asking them those same questions. What can the state do within those things that it can control, either on the proactive side or on the reactive side, to increase regulation or to decrease regulation, to find that right balance. So certainly we'll be asking for input from other people and receiving their ideas as well. Madam Chair, if I could continue, I do have one quick question that did prompt. A few months ago, the average number of permits that we were issuing a day, Colorado was issuing a day, oil and gas permits, was 34 a day on average. Is that trend, do you know where that number is now? Is it still on?
I don't know if Todd has up-to-date information on that. Todd actually has, for a few years, done the severance tax in our office, so why don't I leave that until he gets up here. And if he doesn't have that he's looked at it really recently, then we can get that for you. I would, however, expect that that number would be declining just because of the price of oil declining.
Right. And again, Mike, I'd like to clarify the difference between oil and natural gas. That the majority of what we produce in Colorado is in fact natural gas, with the minority being actually oil. So there is a differentiation in the rates, and that industry, the industry is different to some extent. So thank you for that. You want to finish?
Yes, and